Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.
Seb, thank you so much for your time today. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So great to have you.
No, I'm so happy to be here.
All right, so we are at lovely Token 2049. Some of the stories that are coming out right now are really around sort of the AI and blockchain combination, where we're starting to see all this converge across the board, because there's going to be millions, if not billions, of agents that will potentially tap into the blockchain space, right? So you could have agents doing what they need to do, but then connect back into these things. So the bigger picture is that blockchain and digital assets, there's no question they're growing. So one of the things I'm kind of curious to get your perspective about with Ledger is, where do you see this going in terms of security at the institutional level right now?
I mean, I think that what I like is this idea of convergence, because I think convergence we're seeing, so you were talking about the convergence between AI and blockchain, but we're also seeing a convergence between traditional finance and blockchain. So I think that that's one of the big trends that we're seeing as well. And what I find interesting is that in both of these types of convergences, you do need like a layer of security, right? What I always go back to is this idea that when you're trying to build a business, and you saw it with the way that the internet grew from the beginning, like the mid 90s to like the 2000s, etc. You need strong foundations, right? Like when the internet bubble burst in 2000, it's because the foundations were not strong, right?
Absolutely.
So in blockchain and in finance as a whole, the foundation of security is really important. When the first banks, right, like back in the Wild West,
right.
One of the big issues was to create like a vault that thieves could go and go after. So I think that that foundation is really, really important. And it's going to be more and more important because obviously AI is going to create some potential issues, because as you said, millions or billions of agents means you're going to have to really test your security. And so I think that it's becoming more and more at the forefront. And so we're trying to play our role, and we really feel a sense of responsibility to play that role of securing the ecosystem.
Yeah. So how I always associate Ledger with people having personal devices with their digital assets, whether it's cryptocurrency or NFTs or whatever. Going forward, it could be anything, right? Digital identity, these 100%. Types of things locked down onto a device. But now you're seeing institutions. Are they going down the path of also purchasing these devices to run, do you think? Or
so 5 years ago, so Ledger is 10 years old. We celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year, and 5 years ago we had a lot of asks from institutions coming into the space. At the time, it was mostly exchanges or custodians saying, hey, we want that level of security and we want to have self-custody, but we have an issue because we cannot have one person holding the keys. So can you create something which is going to be a layer, give us the same level of security, but with a layer of governance. So that's what Ledger Enterprise is and was, and we really built it based on feedback and asks from institutions. So now, we fast forward 5 years, and the institutions moving into the space are more traditional finance institutions, not just, but a lot. And they are used to having these governance in place, and they have actually tools, in traditional finance are much more cumbersome than what we have in crypto, right? Which is why also crypto is a huge potential for them, because it's faster, it's cheaper, et cetera, but they still need the security. So we're coming in again with exactly, the setup, and you were talking about the devices. We launched last year Ledger Stacks, which you probably saw, which we designed with Tony Fidel. If you're an institutional user, you will actually be using Ledger Stack to sign transactions. The difference is that you won't be the only one. You'll have a number of people that will, and you'll customize really the way that you're going to define based on how big the transaction is, how many people you want involved. Do you want your CFO to actually sign the transaction? Do you actually need the CEO to sign the transaction? So it's the same really concept, right? Based on the same ecosystem and the same secure DNA, but with a layer of governance, which I think is very important.
Okay, so it's multi-sig with using multiple central ledger nanos or S's or stacks, whatever the case might be. Okay.
Yeah, and with the SaaS, link to it, etc.
Okay.
It's not just the direct.
Excellent. All right. Well, so I have to bring up this because I think it's important given the context of security these days and people being worried about it. Bybit was hacked not long ago. to the tune of, I guess it was like 1.2-ish billion dollars or whatever. And ETH initially got converted over to, of course, Bitcoin or whatever the case was. Most of it, unfortunately, is sort of lost in a way. More than likely.
Or in the pockets of like Korean hackers.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. North Korean hackers. I'm sure that you've gone through and reviewed what was publicized with that. How do you see organizations handling this a little bit better? Because that was, I thought, maybe I'm wrong about this, an open source piece of code that was pushed out, and unfortunately they got duped or tricked into actually signing, multi-sig signing, and people unfortunately released all these funds. It's tough. All of this is extraordinarily difficult. You do everything you can possibly do to protect these things. But going forward, what lessons do you think people learn from that?
That's a great question. I mean, first of all, I have to say that we were in touch with the Bybit folks like the day of the hack, and we had like a lot of conversations to try to help. Also, I think the whole ecosystem as a whole really like tried to lend a hand and see how can we help. And I thought the way that the ecosystem rallied to defend Bybit was very strong, and the way that Bybit communicated to the ecosystem was also very strong. Like Ben took to Twitter and really like step by step released all these informations. The guys from Safe also, which was the piece of software that you're mentioning that got hacked, also communicated quite well. So I felt that there was like this level of maturity in the way that it was handled by the ecosystem, which was reassuring. But that being said, it has to also be a wake-up call to do things right, because the way the setups that were in place were clearly not secure enough, because otherwise they wouldn't have been hacked, right? I mean, I'll say it that way, like had they been using Ledger Enterprise or another solution, but Ledger Enterprise, that hack would not have happened, right? We have something called clear signing, which means that like you see the transaction before you sign it. What happened there was blind signing, so you can see the transaction. It looked like you were sending 400 ETH. Actually, you were like releasing access to the whole wallet that was holding the $1.2 billion. So, it has to be a wake-up call. We have been having a lot of conversations with people in the space since the hack, talking about, okay, how do we upgrade our security? So I think it is kind of like sinking in. The reality about security, though, is that, and we know it from our personal experiences, that you only care about it when you get hacked, right? You're only going to care about like your home security if somebody like comes in and breaks down your door, or steals your car, whatever. That's when you're going to start thinking about alarms before you're like thinking, oh no, it's not going to happen to me. And I think there's still that ethos, that idea of, oh, it's not going to happen to us. We're okay. Oh, and I've had these conversations many times, like, hey, you guys should consider like Ledger Enterprise. No, we're good. We've got like our own setup. It's going to work until they get hacked. So I think, obviously, I'm preaching for my choir,
right.
But I'm preaching for a broader choir, which is like the crypto ecosystem choir, because I think that these things, at the end of the day, even though I feel that the way, because it was handled well and everybody was made whole, Bybit didn't go down, it wasn't an FTX situation, but at the end of the day, it does hurt the ecosystem. So I'm preaching for my Ledger choir, but I'm preaching for like the overall ecosystem choir, because we really need to make sure that we do things right, that we're not seen. I think we're coming out a little bit of that moment where people think, oh, crypto, it's scams and all these different things, and the influx of traditional players, people who have been in the space for a very long time, or in the finance space for a very long time, is going to help crypto. But people in crypto, the OGs and that have been around for a long time, need to really take this at heart and realize that they need to make changes.
No, that makes a lot of sense. No, I appreciate your thoughts on that. So one other question that's slightly different than all of this is sort of the regulatory landscape that we're seeing around the world. Maybe the United States is a little bit further behind. Certain parts of Europe may be the same, depending on where you are. Where do you see that going? Do you think that what would happen in the United States with the election, I'm not getting political here at all, but like the move towards more openness in that space, definitely I'm assuming it's you think that's better, helpful?
So I think that regulation is a good thing, because people need to have a playing field and understand what that playing field is. If there's no regulation, you don't really know, if I do this, is it okay? Is that okay? Is that not okay? Right? We saw it with like the ICO craze, like back in like the mid 2017. There was no regulation there, and then it created like all the issues that we saw. So what's interesting is that Europe was the first one to move with regulation through MiCA, and you can debate whether it's good, whether it's not good, but at least it created this this ecosystem where the establishment, what you can and cannot do. in typical European fashion, it was originally like 60 pages, it became like 2,000, and now it's like, okay, so wait, let me go to page 1,972 to see if I can do this and do that.
Yeah.
But the idea was good, and then it's always this kind of like push and pull, right? Like you don't want to stifle innovation, but you do want to create regulation. So I think what's interesting is that the U.S. Is obviously in a moment where they're creating much more positive regulation for crypto. I think it will help the ecosystem. I think we're seeing obviously in the space a lot of people that like maybe had moved their funds are now going back there. So it's actually positive for the country as well and for the ecosystem. So I mean, when I look at it, when I look at my, we're a very global company. The U.S. has always been our biggest market, but on the institutional side, I'm really seeing the opportunity that's going to be there. But we're in Dubai. Like regulation is amazing here, right? Like Dubai's done an amazing job doing regulation. Singapore's done a really good job doing regulation. So I think that what we need to find, and I hope the U.S. does that, and maybe Europe will learn also from that, is to find kind of like this middle ground where you're allowing companies, because we're still very early innings in what we're doing in crypto, let them innovate and give them, like an idea of like where they can innovate and what is okay and what's not okay, because the regulation does help push innovation as long as it doesn't stifle it.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I spoke with your colleague Ian Rogers, right? Maybe last year at Consensus, and he had introduced Stacks. She brought it. He was very prideful.
His baby.
It's a beautiful device. What's on if there's any roadmap that you can share? What's going like in the next few years? What do you see happening? Anything with the hardware devices that might be evolving or changing?
I mean, we're always, half of the company is like tech and R&D, so we're always trying to innovate and find new ways. We don't want to rest on our laurels. We did bring out 2 devices last year in the market, like Stacks and Flex. But we're thinking about what's next, and so watch this space. Nothing I can announce today. But the one thing I will say though is that and I'll echo some what you said earlier about how there's more and more digital assets, and now it's going to go to identity, etc. One of the things that we have, for example, is security key, which basically allows you to sign in to Web 2 using a device which is like a ledger, meaning that you don't have to remember your passwords anymore, and you can be fully secure all the time. You just you can, and it works with Google, it works with Amazon, it works with everything that you're doing today, where you have to remember this password, all these different things, and that your passwords are not safe on Web 2 devices. They are safe with a ledger. So I think that what we're thinking about is how we go beyond crypto. Crypto is still going to be the heart of what we do, but like as you said, down the line it's going to be digital identity. So right now it's like passwords, but tomorrow it might be the deed to your house, might be your passport, it might be all these different things. Look, we're talking about Europe. You have some countries like Estonia, for example, that have like digitalized like everything and what they do, which is great, and I have friends and they show me everything they have, but it's on their phone, and the phone is a major attack vector. Huge. A ledger is not an attack vector. So we're really thinking about how do we make, and also what I find interesting is as I was talking about convergence between traditional finance and crypto, the convergence between Web3 and Web2 or Web3 and your daily life, I think is really important. That's what's also going to onboard like the next billion or 2 billion or 3 billion users. And I see a world where everyone will have a ledger or an equivalent to be able to protect their digital identity, their digital self. What's more important to protect than yourself, right?
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Seb, anything else you want to bring up or talk about?
No, I mean I think we've covered pretty a lot of good things. I mean, one thing I'd like to talk about is just because we're talking about institutions. What I think is really interesting also in the space is that we're seeing now like a layer of services on top of the security. Because it's one thing to secure your assets, but once you've secured them, you want to do something with them. So we've been building a network called TradeLink, which is an off-exchange trading platform. That's seeing like a lot of traction in the market, because it's really allowing people not to have counterparty risk, which is one of the issues that like asset managers, traditional asset managers have when they trade on exchange, and some of them like are not even allowed to trade on exchange. So that's been like one of the big things that they're keeping us busy, and where I see a lot of potential also, because as we know, right, like crypto has been a very retail-driven ecosystem, and the next wave is really coming from institutions and traditional finance. And so we want to have, as we build the right services for consumers with hardware, but also Ledger Live, etc., to be able to do things securely, we want to do the same for institutions, not just secure your crypto, but also be able to trade your crypto stake your crypto down the line, maybe
Right.
swap your crypto, etc., etc.
Excellent. Well, thank you. It was
Thank
awesome.
you.
Really appreciate it.
Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.